It's a fascinating and tragic pattern.
Cornelius Vanderbilt started with just $100 and built one of America's greatest fortunes, a staggering railroad and shipping empire. Yet, within a few generations, it had all but evaporated, squandered by heirs who inherited the wealth, but not the wisdom. But this isn't a story from a dusty history book. We just watched this exact pattern unfold again. Remember the loud music, the endless racks, and those iconic yellow bags? Forever 21. At its peak, the family behind it commanded a fortune of nearly $6 billion. It felt permanent, an unstoppable force in every mall. And then it vanished. The entire US empire was liquidated in just 106 days. So how does a family that builds a retail giant become the very ones who burn it to the ground?
To understand how a $6 billion empire vanishes, we have to go back to the beginning, to a Los Angeles gas station in 1981. Imagine it, 1981. The air in Los Angeles feels different, humming with a kind of electric possibility. But for two new arrivals, Do-won and Sook Chang, it's a world away from everything they've ever known. They had just left South Korea, a country still piecing itself back together from the war. As Do-won later said, the opportunities there were limited. So they packed up their lives and landed in LA with no college degrees, a limited grasp of English, and their entire life savings, $11,000. And then the grind began. It was a level of work that is almost hard to comprehend. Do-won worked 3 jobs at the same time: a janitor, a coffee shop attendant, and a gas station attendant. His days were 19 hours long, 19 hours of physical labor for $3 an hour. This wasn't just working hard. This was a complete and total surrender of one's life to the pursuit of a foothold, any foothold in a new world. And it was there, in the quiet, monotonous hours at the gas station, that something shifted. Under the Californian sun, surrounded by the smell of gasoline, he started noticing a pattern. He'd watch the cars pull in and out, and he saw that the people driving the nicest cars, the polished Mercedes, the sleek BMWs, when he'd ask them what they did, they all had the same answer. They were in the garment business. Day after day, the pattern held. It wasn't a lightning strike of genius. It was a slow, dawning realization, a quiet observation made by a man who was paying attention while the world saw him as invisible. He knew nothing about fashion, but he saw the proof of its rewards right in front of him, every single day. So he took a job in a clothing store, immersing himself in this new ecosystem, learning everything he could. The seed of an idea was planted. But for a man with almost nothing, an idea is just a dream. To make it real, that would demand a sacrifice he wasn't even sure he was ready to make. That sacrifice, it turned out, looked like this: 3 more years of working 19-hour days, 7 days a week. 3 years of scrimping and saving until they had scraped together $11,000. It doesn't sound like a lot of money to build an empire, but it was everything. It was every single dollar they had in the world. And they bet all of it, their entire American dream, on one small 900-square-foot shop in Highland Park, Los Angeles. On April 16, 1984, they opened the doors to Fashion 21. The business plan was simple and smart. They sourced wholesale closeouts of trendy, Korean-style fashion that they knew the local community wanted but couldn't easily find. Every morning, they would pray together, a ritual that grounded their immense ambition in a quiet faith. They held their breath. this was it. Was this crazy gamble going to pay off? Or would they lose everything they had spent years fighting for? The answer came quickly. In its very first year of business, that tiny store brought in $700,000 in revenue. To put that in perspective, that was 23 times what the previous owner had managed to sell in a year. It was an explosion, a liftoff. This one little store, this perfect, simple engine of success, was proof that their dream could work. But this initial victory planted the seeds of a much bigger, more dangerous ambition. It wasn't just about opening another store anymore. It was about building a global multi-billion-dollar empire. And that would demand a completely different kind of hustle and a completely different kind of hubris. And that new hustle began, simply enough, with a new name. Fashion 21 was a store, but Forever 21, that was an idea. It was a promise. It was based on a simple, brilliant insight from Mr. Chang. Old people want to be 21 again, and young people want to be 21 forever. It was a name that sold not just clothes, but a feeling, an identity that was universally desired. With this new banner, they turned their sights on the heart of American consumerism, the shopping mall. And their strategy was one of pure, disciplined aggression. They took on zero debt, no outside investors. Every single dollar of profit was poured back into growth. The engine was so efficient that for years they were opening a new store every 6 months, all funded by cash from the last one. It was a self-perpetuating rocket ship. Then the ambition got bigger. As other retailers went bankrupt, the Chang saw an opportunity not just to rent a space in the mall, but to become the mall. They started buying up the massive multi-story anchor spaces left behind by department stores like Mervyn's and Sears for pennies on the dollar. The biggest store was 127,000 square feet. The largest was 162,000 square feet. These weren't stores, they were palaces. They had curving grand staircases, polished marble floors, and glittering chandeliers hanging from the ceilings. And Do Chang, even as a billionaire, personally approved every single lease. And what were they selling in these opulent cathedrals of commerce? $5 t-shirts, $10 jeans. It was a breathtaking contrast. A business model that felt like a glitch in the system, selling some of the cheapest clothes in America inside some of the most grandiose retail spaces imaginable. And for a while, it worked spectacularly. By 2015, the empire was at its absolute zenith. 794 stores across 48 countries, 43,000 employees, and an astonishing $4.4 billion in annual revenue. The couple who had arrived with nothing were now worth almost $6 billion. It was the American dream, written in capital letters, a story so perfect it felt like a movie. But what the world saw was only half the picture. Beneath the shine of the polished marble and behind the endless racks of trendy clothes, a very different story was unfolding. A story of absolute control, of dozens of lawsuits, and of a darkness that was beginning to fester right at the heart of the family. The glittering empire had a rotten foundation, and the first cracks were about to show. And that first crack wasn't on a balance sheet. It was in a courtroom. Suddenly, Forever 21 became one of the most sued companies in the entire fashion industry. We're talking over 50 copyright infringement lawsuits. Big names, Diane von Furstenberg, Anna Sui, even Gwen Stefani, accused them of systematically stealing designs. The legal costs were estimated to be somewhere between $50 and $100 million. But it was just the cost of doing business. If the company was ruthless with its competitors' designs, it was just as unforgiving with its own workers. In 2001, they faced a massive boycott over horrific sweatshop conditions. Years later, a 2017 Department of Labor investigation found that 85% of the factories they used in Los Angeles were violating labor laws. The glittering palace was being built on a foundation of exploitation, and this darkness, it reached right into the heart of the family itself. The two daughters, Linda and Esther, were groomed to be the heirs. They had Ivy League educations and impressive titles like Vice President of Merchandising, but these were titles without power. Inside the headquarters, an atmosphere of intense, almost paranoid control took hold. Sook, the mother, was known to cover the office windows with paper so no one could see what she was working on.
She would personally check employee bags as they left for the day. Meanwhile, Do-won, even as the head of a multi-billion-dollar global company, still insisted on personally signing off on every single real estate lease. But the most telling crack, the one that reveals everything you need to know, happened in 2015, at the absolute peak of their wealth. The company needed cash, so the parents, Do-won and Sook, borrowed $10 million from their own daughters. They took it from their daughters' personal trust funds at an incredibly low interest rate. It was an unsecured loan. This meant that if the company went under, the daughters would be last in line to get their money back, if they got anything at all.
Their own parents had made them unprotected creditors to the family business. It was a decision so profoundly telling. Family and business were one and the same, and the business always came first. And you think that this kind of internal decay, this ethical rot, would be the thing that finally brought the walls down. But it wasn't. The real killer blows, the 4 specific, catastrophic decisions that would burn through billions of dollars, were still to come. These were the mistakes that dismantled a $6 billion dynasty, the real killer blows. The first was a sin of pure, unrestrained ambition, a disastrous international expansion. Fueled by years of success, Chang believed his formula was universally applicable, but it wasn't.
The international operations began bleeding money, losing an estimated $100 million annually. By 2018, the company was burning through $10 million a month on its overseas stores alone. The blunders were almost absurd. For example, they opened massive stores in Germany without the basic market research that would have told them German law requires most retail stores to be closed on Sundays, a peak shopping day elsewhere. It was death by 1,000 unresearched cuts. Then came the second fatal flaw, a profound hubris that led them to systematically ignore expert advice. They paid millions for world-class analysis from the planet's top consulting firms and then treated their reports as expensive garbage. Bain & Company told them to halt their European expansion. They responded by opening 23 more stores. Boston Consulting Group advised them to centralize their chaotic supplier network. They refused, clinging to their old, inefficient methods. McKinsey recommended a complete overhaul of their outdated systems. They implemented a mere 15% of the proposal. They were buying maps to escape the forest fire, but insisted on following their own gut instinct deeper into the flames. So they paid for the world's best advice and then simply ignored it. You might think that's the whole story, pure ego. But just for a moment, let's look deeper. The real tragedy wasn't just that they didn't listen. It was that their entire system was built to be deaf.
If you miss this next point about their supply chain, you miss the one rusty gear that ground the entire $6 billion machine to a halt. This was the third flaw, a staggering level of digital incompetence. In an age when brands were becoming online first, Forever 21's e-commerce only accounted for 16% of its sales. Competitors like H&M and Zara were hitting 30 or 40%. But the truly fatal number was this: It took Forever 21 a staggering 20 weeks to get a design from the drawing board to the store shelf. H&M could do it in 7. Zara could do it in as little as 2. Forever 21 wasn't just slow. In the world of fast fashion, they were standing still. Their physical stores had no visibility into online inventory, and the online store had no connection to the shops. They were running 2 separate businesses, both of them badly. This leads to the final fatal flaw, a complete failure to adapt to a changing culture. The brand's entire identity was built on being trendy and disposable, but their target audience, Gen Z, was evolving. They started looking for values. They found inclusion in Rihanna's Fenty, authenticity in brands like Kylie Cosmetics, and a budding interest in sustainability that made Forever 21's throwaway culture feel increasingly out of touch. The brand that was meant to be Forever 21 was suddenly looking very, very old.
As Professor Eric Gordon of USC summarized it, you can remain in your self-created bubble for a long time, but eventually that bubble bursts. All of these fatal flaws trace back to that one core problem: founder hubris, made exponentially worse by the complete absence of an independent board that could offer a simple, sobering reality check. The why of the collapse was now tragically clear, but the story of the fall itself, the sheer speed and the final crushing humiliation, was yet to unfold. Because this $6 billion empire wasn't just sold. In the end, it was practically given away. The final collapse began on September 30, 2019. That was the day Forever 21 officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
The signal went out across the globe, and the lights started turning off in 40 countries. Then, just a few months later, in February 2020, the final number came in. The price for what was left of the empire. It was sold to a consortium of investors for just $81 million. Let that sink in. An empire once valued at nearly $6 billion, sold for $81 million. That's a demolition. A staggering 98.2% of its value simply vanished. And with that sale, the family's control was severed completely. Do Won and Sook Chang were out. No board seats, no voting rights. The dynasty they had built was no longer theirs, in any sense of the word. But perhaps the most heartbreaking part of this whole story, the cruelest twist, was reserved for their daughters. Remember that $10 million loan they had given their parents? It was unsecured, built on family trust. When the dust settled, they recovered just 18 cents for every dollar they put in, a personal loss of over $8 million. The very family-first ethos that defined the empire had, in the end, personally bankrupted the next generation. So you'd think the story ends there, right? The family humiliated and removed, the brand sold for parts. A sad but clean ending. But the final chapter of Forever 21 is somehow even more brutal. The family was gone, but the brand itself was about to face one last public execution. And that execution wasn't a swift blow. It was a slow, agonizing bleed out, played out in empty shopping malls across the country. The new owners, a consortium of mall operators, tried to revive the brand. They even announced a partnership with the new king of fast fashion, Shein. But as one analyst bleakly noted, partnerships don't matter if the core product, strategy, and execution aren't there. The magic was simply gone. By late 2024, the final spiral began. Payments to manufacturers were late, then they stopped. In February 2025, the inevitable was announced. All remaining US stores would be liquidated. It took just 106 days. 354 stores gone.
The LA headquarters, once the heart of a $6 billion empire, was shuttered. And somewhere, the last iconic yellow bag was carried out of a store for the final time, leaving behind nothing but an empty corridor where chandeliers once hung.
It is such a tragic, perfect circle. In 1981, Chang built his empire because he was paying attention. He noticed something at a gas station that no one else did, that the people driving the nicest cars were all in the garment business. He lost that empire because he stopped noticing anything that contradicted what he already believed. It leaves you with a heavy question, doesn't it? Was Forever 21's collapse inevitable, a product of its time? Or do you think different leadership could have saved it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you, like me, are fascinated by these hidden stories of fallen empires and the quiet lessons they teach us.
I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe and join our community. It truly helps this channel grow.